and Leeds knew they were going to collect the league championship this afternoon. There it is, take a long look at it.
Leeds United were back in the minds of English football supporters up and down the country once again, and it's because of one man, Howard Wilkinson. After a decade in the doldrums, he was the man that changed Leeds United forever. Once again, Leeds found themselves chasing their own tail, hiring a manager midway through a season who would oversee the previous management's players. Howard Wilkinson was effectively Sheffield Wednesday born and bred, having played for the Owls, coached the Owls and managed the Owls. He gave them sanctuary with a high of 5th in the First Division and a spot in the FA Cup semi-final in '86, and sanctuary is what Owls are supposed to like. After not being offered the same kind of relief from an unambitious and spendthrift boardroom, he found himself at Leeds United, which is enough irony for one day. As the first outsider to the club in almost a decade, Wilkinson immediately set about removing the stench of Leeds United's past. Norman Hunter removed as a coach, so too the presence of Joe Jordan and Mick Bates from around the training ground. This was a fresh start. On the playing staff, he would add to the Bremner-endorsed acquisitions of Noel Blake and Vince Hilaire by snapping up Rotherham's Andy Williams, as well as Carl Schutt, Mike Whitlow and Neil Parsley. He picked up the club skirting the edges of the relegation dogfight in what would become a stable foundation.
Hilaire, Sheridan, have a go, yes! What a beauty!
Collins' first-time ball broke for Baird, who scored in a manner he could never quite achieve.
ITV had kindly reimbursed the Football League's clubs to the tune of £44 million over 4 years from 1988, and finally, in the subsequent summer, Wilkinson felt relaxed enough to spend some of that cash. After flogging some of the old names in John Sheridan, Ian Baird and Noel Blake, a new calibre of player entered Elland Road. If it wasn't Gordon Strachan from Manchester United, Newcastle's John Hendry and Wimbledon hardman Vinnie Jones in the summer, it was Jim Beglin, Chris Fairclough and Miles Sterland who added further grit and experience. A defeat up at St James Park on the opening day proved that things weren't going to be plain sailing for Sergeant Wilco's new band of players. Neither did a League Cup exit at the first hurdle against Oldham Athletic. But when the season got going, it really did get going. Everything about the club felt fresh. 15 matches had transpired between the opening day aberration in the North East to Leeds' next league defeat on Remembrance Day at Filbert Street. It was the act of bouncing back from that, as well as another November loss in the Midlands away to West Brom, that was the mark of a stronger Leeds United. By Christmas, promotion seemed a formality as they led Sunderland by 9 with almost half the campaign played. With the prospect of First Division football at Elland Road for the first time in 8 years, players were now queuing round the block to turn out for the club. The most impactful, Lee Chapman. Leeds United could no longer be stopped. Regularity as way to Barnsley on New Year's Eve, at Swindon in February, as well as at Watford and Wolves in March, the tension ratcheted up a bit. Then the Peacocks were held by both Bradford and Plymouth before Oldham stuck their oar in yet again. It left the club flailing about trying to catch hold of anything. A win from anywhere would do. Thankfully, Sheffield United obliged with a 4-0 win, but the relief was merely temporary. First, a trip to the south coast, and Brighton only returned a point before a Yorkshire rival pitched up at Elland Road and did this. What a gut punch. Suddenly, with First Division at their mercy, Leeds were now contriving to throw it all away. They led the league still, but it was on the flimsiest of bases. Sheffield United had a game in hand and trailed by just a point, whilst Newcastle United were the ones with all the momentum and sat only a point further back, waiting for a Yorkshire slip-up. The visit of Leicester City, therefore, was vital. On an afternoon where promotion could have been sealed, both Sheffield United and Newcastle United followed Leeds' incredibly tense queue and also won. It was as you were heading into May Day, Howard Wilkinson was about to rest on his laurels. In a shocking move, he ditched most of his first big signings, John Hendry and Jim Beglin gone before Vinnie Jones departed for Sheffield United. The sale of the latter marked a cultural shift towards Gary McAllister, the club's new midfield fulcrum at a cost of £1 million. The Scot was the second through the Elland Road door that summer, costing over £1 million, as John Lukic made his long-awaited return from Arsenal whilst Chris White was added from West Brom. Leeds were back and they weren't about to simply make up the numbers. They played 6 matches in only reaching the 4th round of the Cup despite taking eventual champions Arsenal to 3 replays. The League Cup also a net positive as Leeds took apart each of Leicester, Oldham, QPR and Aston Villa to reach a 2-legged semi-final against Manchester United.
Sterling getting the header, sharp, it's there for Manchester United, curls it in, and it might even come, it has for Chris White, and that's the way the header, they claim a handball, it might come from the player, but he's sharp now for Manchester United.
Thankfully for Leeds fans, and with personal pride attached for Howard Wilkinson himself, it was Sheffield Wednesday who wound up beating Alex Ferguson's side at Wembley in the final. Cup success, however, is all well and good until you've got to face up to the harsh realities of the league marathon. But those realities weren't at all harsh. In fact, Leeds looked like they belonged back in the First Division.
Neville Southall came for Lukic's defence-splitting punt, collided with Imre Varadi, and in rushed Gary Speed.
Strachan, the lead skipper, this time makes no mistake.
Capable drive from 25 yards to celebrate his return.
Chamberlain felt that he could get it in the first place, but he didn't. Chapman improvised. And
from the summertime triumphs over Everton and Norwich to the autumnal bragging rights over Sheffield United from the correct side of the Pennines and away at Main Road to those from the wrong side of the tracks, Leeds started off brilliantly. They only got stronger as 91 closed in. A run of 4 wins ended one of the happiest years on record, with each of Everton, Sunderland, Chelsea and Wimbledon going down. Wilkinson's side even got a point at Old Trafford. Just as Leeds had potential designs on trotting back out onto the continent, a more inconsistent second half of the season struck. And whilst the club tended to ship 5 goals a game just as often as they put 5 a game beyond their opposition, their 4th place finish was one to marvel at. An incredible foundation for the club, who boasted the Football Writers' Player of the Year in 34-year-old Gordon Strachan. The question now was, could they maintain it? Howard Wilkinson was driven by his personal past of not standing still in football management. It had cost him at Hillsborough in a previous life, and he was quick to step on the throat of English football that gaped open vulnerably for him. Tony Dorigo was the 3rd player to enter Wilkinson's Leeds for over £1 million, and he was quickly joined in that bracket by Rod Wallace. If that wasn't ambitious enough, Steve Hodge made it 3 top-class signings from 3. To say that ambition was represented in Leeds' start to the campaign was an understatement.
Secured all 3 points with a solitary goal.
Cross, it's bounced away to Speed. Oh, that's with his right foot. That's a great goal from Gary Speed. Not really. It's out to Dorigo. Half volley. Oh, that's a wide to Speed. Chip. There's Carl Schutt, and Carl Schutt scored now. Grobler did his best. Dorigo's in there. So too Hodge.
And with that loss at Crystal Palace, Leeds United were finally beaten in league competition. In any competition, if we're honest with ourselves. The fact that they'd only be beaten in the remainder of 91 in something called the fucking Zenith Data Systems Cup tells you all you need to know about how the Whites rebounded.
What's this one gone? The far post, there's Wallace, and Rod Wallace has scored his first goal. Block him off, Chapman's there, and so's Wallace, and Rod Wallace.
Leeds United were not messing around. They were top of English football's top division for the first time since April 1974, and they were holding their own against the best the land had to offer. Against each of their title rivals, Leeds walked away with something. In the early days, it was a trio of draws against Wilkinson's former Flames Sheffield Wednesday, as well as at Old Trafford and at home to Arsenal. Then came a famous win at home to Liverpool on September the 21st before a point was gotten out of Tottenham, and all 3 over famous names like Aston Villa and Everton to end the year. This was only replicated in the League Cup, where Leeds found themselves in a New Year's quarter-final with Manchester United. In fact, the return of the FA Cup granted them the same opposition, both matches falling a week apart, both at Elland Road. After dispatching Everton comprehensively in the 4th round of the League Cup, there was now the feeling that Leeds could do just about anything.
Giggs
onto Kanchelskis, onside, he's slipped it past Lukic, and Manchester United are in front. Hughes up, the early ball might find him, Speed getting back, Hughes!
You see, Manchester United have been on a long journey of their own from the second division malaise and back into the big time. They were favourites to win the league title for the first time in a long while. After eliminating them from 2 competitions in basically the same movement, Leeds, as a young first division team, could be forgiven for falling away. And whilst they would surrender only their second league defeat of the season shortly thereafter away at Oldham, the truth of the matter could be found between the 2 cup exits when Leeds were faced with title rivals Sheffield Wednesday in the league.
And Chapman is Dorigo. That breaking away, here he is. And there's a goal. Gary Speed won't get it. Chapman will. Sterling to Wallace. Whitlow. Wallace. Rodney Wallace.
That was the real Leeds United. And whilst Lee Chapman's absences did trigger a tense few weeks and more regular dropped points, Howard Wilkinson always had a trick up his sleeve, and in the first months of '92 he went by the name of Eric Cantona. To call it a gamble would be underplaying Cantona's entire professional existence. He was a man ostensibly banned from French football who was being touted around England by his national team coach, the legendary Michel Platini, because of his incredible potential. If only he could find a strict environment where he could flourish. The robust Leeds United of spring 1992 was supposed to be that place.
Wallace with a real chance. He's got it. Ron Wallace on his return.
On Saturday, he scores from the spot again.
And Chapman side-footed it home.
And after that week of football, we knew decidedly less about Leeds than ever before. Whilst they were spectacular at White Hart Lane and at home to Wimbledon, they were pulverised by QPR 4-1. Leeds had a 2-point advantage at the top of the league, but only because Manchester United had played 3 games fewer. And whilst they hadn't been beaten since New Year's Day, they had felt the same wrath Leeds had just felt. After all, it was QPR who had inflicted the last defeat on Alex Ferguson's side by that same 4-1 scoreline 2 months prior. Before Leeds had a chance to play again in the league, the Red Devils had 2 opportunities to take control of the title. They missed both, losing at Nottingham Forest before being held at home to Wimbledon. When Leeds got a point at Highbury and the pair both played out goalless encounters on March 28th to opponents from the capital, it was obvious that nerves were being shredded either side of the Pennines. The gap remained at 2, and in one of Man United's 2 games in hand on the final day of March, they finally assumed control with a 3-1 win at Carrow Road. Leeds had chance to return to the top of the top flight on April the 4th with a visit to Man United's city rivals at Main Road. That was supposed to be the defeat that killed Leeds' title bid. As Howard Wilkinson planned to revert to the team from the first half of the season, ditching Cantona for a duo of Wallace and Chapman, Manchester City also got a point out of United. Then the pair traded home wins. First it was Leeds who thrashed Chelsea, then Manchester United who snuck all 3 points out of Southampton in front of the Stretford end. Suddenly Easter was upon us, and it only seemed fitting that in the final ever First Division season that the holiday would impinge itself on another title challenger.
While Leeds held their nerve to gain 4 points from 2 matches. First, a goalless draw at Anfield. Second game, Leeds edged out Coventry City, who were battling for their own Premier League lives.
Won't! Oh, Schmeichel's lost it! And Manchester United are a goal behind. Alistair will get it clear. Brown! Oh, he scored!
1 point gain from a potential 9, Manchester United had shat the bed in the most spectacular way imaginable. With 2 matches remaining, Leeds were now the ones in the driving seat, and April 26th was one for local rivalries and an afternoon which could potentially crown Leeds United champions of England once again. The Yorkshire club went first, travelling to Bramall Lane for a midday kick-off before Alex Ferguson's side were posted out to Anfield later that afternoon.
Leeds can't get it clear. Corp! He does do so. There's Wallace. Speed now against Gale and Wallace. It's in. Vital. There's McAllister's free kick. Newsom. Oh, it's 2-1. Another one of those gammon corners again. It's back in off Chapman. The even stature winner. Cantona Cars racing on, Gale in there, he's needed up, he's headed it over, it's gone in!
Agony at Anfield. Manchester United lose 2-0 to bitter rivals Liverpool last April and blow the title. That result confirms Leeds as champions.
Didn't that man, John Newsom, score a couple of important goals?
Leeds were the champions of England, and in Howard Wilkinson he was only the second manager Elland Road had ever seen lift a major trophy. Acceptable at home without a win on the road all season, Leeds United marked the birth of the Premier League by being one of English football's worst ever champions. Just when everything seemed right with the club for the first time in ages, financially they were grand thanks to Admiral chucking £10 million at them. Overdrafts were being underwritten by the board and the formation of the Premier League promised an even more boatload of cash. A new East Stand sprouted up, promising yet more returns. And even though hindsight will tell you that Eric Cantona's sale to Manchester United kickstarted the disastrous middle portion of the 90s, he hadn't particularly been all that at Elland Road. Hat-tricks aside, of course, in the opening weeks of the 92-93 season, first in the Charity Shield, then in the Premier League, there was simply nothing to suggest that he would go on to be the kingpin for such a dominant machine as Manchester United over the next 5 years. As such, Leeds barred themselves from competing at the very top of the Premier League in its inaugural years. Therefore, they had to rely on the cup competitions, and what better way to show that than in the European Cup? No wait, the Champions League, which is what they were calling Europe's top competition these days. Yeah, so that was a bit of a mess from start to finish, really. After the Stuttgart debacle, Leeds were conveniently handed a 3-0 walkover, which tied up the aggregate scoreline thanks to the German side exceeding their foreigner limit. The Camp Nou, all 7,400 of them, was the scene of Leeds' progression to the second round, to Rangers, where their journey was swiftly ended. Effectively, what was a £2.75 million exchange as Brian Deane came in and David Batty went out should have plunged Leeds into more chaos, especially when considering David Rocastle's time in Yorkshire was dogged by injury. However, they improved in the 93-94 season. They even began to win on the road again, starting on September the 11th with Southampton. And come the end of the campaign, they were dreaming of Europe once again.
With speed again, now up wide on the left. Lovely move by Leeds. Dorigo now. Dorigo cross. Oh, there's the header. Wallace has made a great run here. Wallace. Oh, what a goal.
One solitary point was the difference between the blinding lights of Europe and yet another season as just another team in the middle of the Premier League. When Howard Wilkinson wasn't peppering the Steel City to bring in names from United's John Pemberton to Wednesday's Carlton Palmer and Nigel Worthington, he scoured South Africa for talent, most notably Lucas Radebe, then Philemon Masinga.
For the lead skipper, here's McAllister again. Oh, that's beautifully done. Gary McAllister.
It was an improvement of 3 points, remaining in 5th, but this time Leeds United would be back in Europe. And to play in Europe you need a European edge, so Leeds scoured the European market for some European footballers. Parma's Thomas Brolin was probably more renowned than Frankfurt's Tony Yeboah, but after the 95-96 season there was one obvious name that Leeds fans took into their hearts. But I'm leaving out the more pertinent details of the 95-96 campaign here because Leeds United had finally returned to Wembley for the first time in 22 years to try and lift a major trophy. Unfortunately, it didn't go too well. It felt like the end of an era, and despite Howard Wilkinson's 10-year plan to dredge up the quality of the entire club from the grassroots of youth right to the very top of the club's financials, reputation and infrastructure, he was gone later that year. It was his work after all that got Leeds into a position where they could win a trophy, the '93 FA Youth Cup. It was Wilkinson's work that helped open up the Thorpe Arch training base. Someone else would have the fruit of his Elland Road labour. Less crucially to on-pitch matters and more so for the future of the club, one of Wilkinson's great Elland Road dealings was the acquisition of David O'Leary on a free from Arsenal in 1993. Before then, however, they would have to suffer through the George Graham days. If you want to see what happened next, watch this old video from our archives.